Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Johnson, and I serve as an elected member of the Bastrop Central Appraisal District Board of Directors. The topic of today's video is a response to false allegations made against me by the Texas Association of Appraisal Districts while they were testifying at a Senate committee hearing. This video should begin to expose the real politics happening inside Texas appraisal districts, where appraisal districts don't comply with the law and their illegal policies and activities are being covered up. Recently, a Texas Senate committee held a hearing where Brett South, a lobbyist for the Texas Association of Appraisal Districts, or TAAD, made false allegations against me. He accused me of sitting in on closed meetings about my lawsuits and using my board position to advocate for my personal property appraisals. I have never done either of those things. Those statements are false. I have never sat in on a closed meeting about my lawsuits, and I have never advocated for my own appraisals. I'm not including the video of Mr. South's testimony, but all those committee meetings are streamed live, and you can look up and view the streaming video of the hearing if you want to. It was a Senate Local Governments Committee hearing that happened on November the 17th, 2024. But I'll show you the words that were spoken. We're going to take a look at what was said, and then I'll show you why TAAD paid their lobbyists to go before the state Senate and lie about me. First, I'll tell you briefly about who was talking. The witness testifying is Brett South. He's the chief appraiser of Hunt County, but he was testifying as a lobbyist representative of the Texas Association of Appraisal Districts, or TAAD. TAAD is a taxpayer-funded lobbying organization that lobbies to prevent appraisal districts' illegal activities from being discovered or facing any kind of accountability. We'll talk more about those specifics later. I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, it thinks I'm screen sharing. So this in highlighted quote next to the number one, here's where Brett South said here's what he said about me at the Senate hearing. He claimed that I, as a board member, refused to recuse myself from closed executive sessions where my lawsuit was discussed. That is false. I have never sat in on a closed session where my lawsuits were discussed. Never. And next to that red number two is the quote where he then claimed that I used my board position to push for changes to beekeeping standards to benefit myself personally. Again, that is false. The only thing I have ever advocated for as a board member is for the appraisal district to comply with the law. So why is Brett South lying? Why is he trying to make me look like the bad guy? And the answer is simple. It is to distract the senators and the public from the real fraud that is happening inside Texas appraisal districts and that he himself is committing. So he claimed my request to discuss beekeeping was to benefit myself personally. But all I have ever tried to do is to get the Bastrop Central Appraisal District to comply with the law. Now let's look at the law, and you'll see what's actually happening inside appraisal districts is much worse than anything I was accused of. Here's the law on calculating productivity values for each land classification. And it says the chief appraiser shall calculate net to land by considering the income that would be due to the owner of the land under cash lease, share lease, or whatever lease arrangement is typical in that area or that category of land. I want to point out that the law uses the word shall, so it is a legal requirement that they use lease rates. I also want to point out that the leases must be for income due to the owner. The law clearly requires that the calculations must use lease rates for income to the landowner to make those calculations. So that seems pretty clear and simple. This is the document that Bastrop Central Appraisal District publishes to show their agricultural productivity values. And here's the productivity valuation that the Bastrop Central Appraisal District calculated for beekeeping. You can see that they used cash leases and not share leases. They calculated the net to land for the previous 5 years using those lease rates. And each year's net to land calculation is over in the right column for each of the 5 years. And then at the bottom of that column, it shows the average of those 5 years as $37.45. And then from that figure, they divided by the capitalization rate to get the productivity value for 2024 for beekeeping at $353.30 per acre. Then you can go down and see all the data that they used for that previous table. This chart shows all the cash lease averages for each of the 5 previous years and for 10 different categories. So there are actually 50 different cash lease averages for beekeeping used in this table. And they use those numbers to come up with the 5-year average cash lease of $37.45, like we just saw, and converted that to the productivity value for 2024 for beekeeping at $353.30, just like we saw. That all looks legitimate when it's put on this fancy form and published in their official governmental document. However, anyone that knows anything about beekeeping knows that there are no leases for income to the landowner for beekeeping. I know something about beekeeping, so I wanted to know where the Bastrop Central Appraisal District's chief appraiser, Fawn Cullens, got those numbers from. So I filed a public information request for the data that was used to come up with all those lease rates for the past 5 years for all the different categories. And you can see that it was my question number 4. This is their response. And to question number 4, they responded, specific documents subject to the request do not exist. So they responded that there was no record of any lease rates. Well, that would mean that she just made all those lease rates up. I couldn't believe that she would just make up all those lease rates for each year and for each category and then publish that false data in her productivity values form, which is a governmental document. I had to ask for clarification on responses to my other questions, but I told her in that request to her that if she claims there were no lease rates, she's just admitting that She just made up all those lease rates that never existed. So to my second request, she responded that she has already fully responded. So she confirmed that her previous response was correct. There were no lease rates. There never had been lease rates. And she just made up all those lease rates and used them in her calculation for the productivity value for beekeeping and published them in her official governmental record. This is a section of the Penal Code, Section 3017. We had seen the law in the Property Tax Code that shows it's illegal to make that calculation without using lease rates. And that is just a violation of a civil requirement of the Property Tax Code. But then when she makes up the lease rates and publishes them as being real, now she's violating criminal statutes in the Penal Code. Here's the law about tampering with a governmental record. Let's see if that applies to Fawn Cullins and what consequences she could face. First, I'll just tell you the definition of governmental record is anything belonging to or kept by the government for information. So right off the bat, a productivity valuation document is a governmental record. This statute says that there are 6 different ways a person can commit this offense, and I think she qualifies under number 1, number 2, and number 5, but we'll just talk about number 1. Under number 1, it is an offense if she knowingly makes a false entry in a governmental record. That productivity valuation manual is a governmental record, and she did make a false entry in that governmental record, and she did so knowingly. Under that number 1, it says an offense under this section, under that number 1 classification, is a Class A misdemeanor unless the actor's intent is to defraud or harm another, in which event the offense is a state jail felony. I think it is clear from her disguising the imaginary lease rates as actual cash leases that she showed she clearly made those entries with intent to defraud. So under number 1, she should be looking at a state jail felony, which is confinement in a state jail for no more than 2 years and no less than 180 days. And in addition to confinement, can be fined up to $10,000. So in order to cover up that she set the productivity value without using lease rates, which is a clear civil violation of the Property Tax Code, she made up a bunch of lease rates and published them in a governmental document. So instead of just violating a civil requirement of the Property Tax Code, now she has violated a criminal violation of the Penal Code. My previous video shows what the Bastrop Central Appraisal District has been doing to prevent the public from ever finding out about this clear violation of this law and many others. So if you haven't seen the last video I made, you might want to look it up. This video is going to show what some of the other people and organizations are doing to prevent the public from ever finding out about Bastrop Central Appraisal District's illegal policies. So let's talk about TAAD. They are a lobbying organization funded by dues from the appraisal districts that are members, and almost every appraisal district in the state is a member of TAAD. All those dues are what supports TAAD and their lobbying efforts. Here's one of their lobbying goals: to prevent elected people from any positions in appraisal districts. And they claim that would bring politics into the appraisal districts. Well, they're wrong in claiming that elections bring politics into appraisal districts. Elections don't bring politics, they bring accountability. In fact, the only way to ensure transparency and accountability in governmental agencies is through elections. Elected officials must answer to the voters, whereas appointed officials answer only to those who appointed them, which leads to political favoritism, backroom deals, and a lack of transparency or accountability. If you don't still remember, look back at my previous video about what all the appointed folks are doing, desperately trying to prevent transparency or accountability. If TAAD were truly concerned about fair and unbiased appraisal processes, they would support elected oversight, not fight against it. In fact, unelected officials are even more susceptible to political influence. The chief appraiser and the board of directors are already political positions. The difference is that right now they are appointed, not elected. Who appoints them? The taxing entities that benefit from higher property valuations, which creates a clear conflict of interest. And TAAD itself is a political organization. They claim to oppose politics in appraisal districts, yet they themselves are a taxpayer-funded lobbying group that directly engages in politics. Their entire purpose is to influence legislation to benefit appraisal districts, even when those districts are violating the law, such as fabricating beekeeping lease rates. What TAAD really wants is for there to be no elected oversight and no accountability. They want appraisal districts to remain controlled by unelected bureaucrats who answer only to those who benefit from higher property values. And they want to get rid of any elected oversight so that they can continue their fraudulent practices, like fabricating lease rates, without any fear of exposure or consequences. When Mr. South was testifying, this is next to the red number 3, he used TAAD's twisted logic to say that being elected brings politics into appraisal district, when in reality, being elected brings about the only possibility of accountability to appraisal districts. So TAAD's purpose is to prevent the public from ever finding out about the appraisal district's illegal policies. But why would Mr. South go along with that? Well, one reason is that he works for TAAD and has to advocate for their public policies, even if he knows better and doesn't believe it personally. It's his job. However, in Mr. South's case, he has a more personal and political reason to lie about me at a Senate hearing. And that reason is because he's doing the exact same thing as the chief appraiser in Hunt County. This is the Hunt County agricultural use valuation. It is another governmental document, but for Hunt County. Here are the ag use values for Hunt County. You can see that for beekeeping, they figured the average net to land at $36.83 and the productivity value of $347 per acre. Here you can see again that they show that the basic productivity value for beekeeping at $347 per acre. And then this is where they show their net to land calculations. And you can see under the column for rent for beekeeping, the land being rented for beekeeping was exactly $56.75 for each of the previous 5 years. And then by using those lease rates, they calculated the productivity value for beekeeping at $347 per acre, just like they showed on the previous page. Once again, I didn't believe there were any lease rates for beekeeping for those years. So I filed a public information request for the data that supports the average rent rate for income to the landowner for beekeeping was $56.75 for each of the years 2018 through 2022. And they responded. Here's their response. And sure enough, they also just made up those rent rates. And they also published those fictitious rent rates in a governmental document. So who is it that's bringing politics into the appraisal process? The people making up the lease rates and trying to prevent their illegal acts from being exposed, or the elected person that is trying to expose that their policies are illegal? Let's go back to that Senate hearing. After Brett South's false accusations, the chairman of the committee, Senator Betancourt, suggested in a very threatening way that I should be investigated by the district attorney, which means arrest and criminal prosecution. Why? Is it because I'm trying to bring transparency to the appraisal district and let the public know what's going on? Or do they want to have me arrested because I'm exposing illegal activity? Well, I can't blame the senators because they probably didn't know that Brett South was lying to them about what I had done. But I'm very happy that when they were informed about potential unethical or illegal acts, they got all fired up to get them stopped, even to the point of personally initiating criminal actions against me. The senators claim to have a zero tolerance policy for fraud and corruption in appraisal districts. And I'm glad to know that as I am fighting against fraud and corruption at the Bastrop Central Appraisal District myself, that I'll have the full support and backing of the powerful Senator Betancourt and the Senate Committee on Local Government. I'm glad that they have a zero tolerance policy for corruption in the appraisal districts. Now, will they have a zero tolerance policy for the fraud the appraisal districts are committing, or just for trying to silence the people that are trying to expose the fraud? So what should happen now? If the Texas senators truly have zero tolerance, they must call for investigations into Bastrop and Hunt County appraisal districts for publishing falsified data. What about the TAAD? Why are the Texas taxpayers funding a lobbying group that protects appraisal districts when they fabricate data? It's time for taxpayers to demand that their tax money not be used to support this organization, so that they can send lobbyists to the legislature to lobby against the interests of the public and to lobby to prevent anyone from being able to expose appraisal districts' unlawful policies and practices. The reason I was elected was to at least give the public the possibility of getting the appraisal districts to operate legally and transparently. I'm going to continue letting the people know what's going on at the appraisal districts, no matter how many threats they make. But I could really use your help. You can help by sharing this video, by contacting your legislators, and also the legislators that have gotten into this fight to protect appraisal districts from accountability. Contact the sheriff, the district attorney, the attorney general's office, and the comptroller's office. Contact your chief appraiser. Contact the board of directors members, all of them, and demand accountability. I plan for the next video to be about Bastrop Central Appraisal District having productivity requirements for open space appraisal. Thank you for watching this one, and let's all make sure that this corruption gets exposed.